So, let me ask you a question. Sounds like a riddle, right? When is a law not a law? Now, in the American legal system, that's not some trick question. It's actually a fundamental principle, and it has massive implications for, well, every single one of us. So let's dive right in and unpack this fascinating idea of constitutional supremacy. And get this isn't some newfangled legal theory. This powerful statement comes straight from the U.S. Supreme Court, and we're talking way back in 1886. It's so direct, so unambiguous, and it's really the core of everything we're going to talk about. An unconstitutional act is not a law. Just let that sink in. That simple phrase. It's honestly one of the most profound ideas in the entire American legal system. Okay, so you've got this big, bold declaration from the highest court in the land. But what does that really mean for us, on the ground? If a legislature passes some law that totally violates the Constitution, what's that mean for you? Or for a police officer on the street? How about your local town council? See, that's the puzzle we're going to piece together right now. All right, so how did we even get to this point? I mean, where did courts get the power to make such a huge declaration? To figure that out, we've got to rewind way back to the beginning. The year is 1803. The case? The legendary Marbury versus Madison. This is the moment. It's when the Supreme Court basically established its own authority to review what Congress does. This is the birth of what we call judicial review, which is just a fancy way of saying the court has the power to look at a law and ask a simple question. Hey, does this thing actually follow the rules in the Constitution? And you have to hear the language the court used here. It is just so powerful. The ruling says that any law that is repugnant to the Constitution is void. And that word void, that's the key to everything. It doesn't just mean the law is flawed or, it needs a do-over. Nope, it means it's a complete nothing, a total nullation. It's like it never even existed. All right, so a law is declared void. Big deal, right? So what? Well, what happens next is huge. This is where a legal domino effect kicks in. And trust me, it impacts every single person that law was ever supposed to touch. Here's a great way to think about it. An unconstitutional law is basically like a counterfeit bill. Yeah, it might look official, it might even feel real in your hand, but the second you try to use it, you find out it has zero value. It's a fake. It has no real authority, and nobody, and I mean nobody, can be forced to accept it. So, remember that Norton case from earlier? Well, it breaks down the consequences into three super critical parts. First up, a void law confers no rights. That means it can't grant anyone any kind of legal privilege or entitlement. Second, it imposes no duties. That's a big one. It means citizens and governments have absolutely no legal obligation to obey it. And third, it affords no protection. Anyone, any official, acting under its authority, they are not legally protected. I mean, the contrast here could not be more stark. A real, valid law. It creates obligations, it gives you legal protection. But a void law? The courts call it a mere nullity. It's treated as if it was never even passed. It's just inoperative, from the moment it was conceived. Okay, but this is where things get really, really serious. What happens to the government officials who try to enforce this thing? Well, if an official enforces a void law, their action is itself unlawful. The Supreme Court has this phrase, they say the officer is stripped of his official character. What that means in plain English is they lose their immunity. They can be held personally liable for what they do. And that whole just following orders excuse, yeah, legally, that goes right out the window. So, okay, we've seen how this all affects individuals, one-on-one. But what happens when you scale this principle up? Well, it actually becomes this incredibly powerful tool for whole communities, for our local governments to stand up and assert their rights against government overreach. And this brings us to a really important legal idea called the anti-commandeering doctrine. At its heart, it's pretty simple. The federal government cannot force states or their local officials to do its bidding. It can't just commandeer their resources, their people, and make them enforce federal policies. Now, this doctrine started out as a thing between the feds and the states. But the logic, it just makes sense to apply it downward too. So by analogy, this same principle acts like a shield, protecting local towns and cities from being unconstitutionally commandeered by the state government, especially when it messes with home rule. The power of a local community to manage its own affairs. All right, we've covered the history, we've talked about the consequences. Let's put all these pieces together and see the logical argument this builds. The logic here is just, it's airtight. Let's walk through it. Premise 1. We know from Marbury v. Madison that if a statute violates the Constitution, it's void, right? Premise 2. We learned from Norton versus Shelby County that a void law imposes no duty on anyone. So, what's the conclusion? It's undeniable. Towns and their officials simply cannot be forced to obey an unconstitutional law.
So look, if you take away just one thing from all this, let it be this. A law that violates the Constitution, it's not a law. At all. It creates zero obligation, it binds absolutely no one, and any official who tries to enforce it, they risk losing their legal immunity and being held personally responsible. It's that simple and that serious.
And let me leave you with one more powerful quote from that Norton case. The court said, "An unconstitutional act is as inoperative as though it had never been passed." Just think about what that means. It's like a legal ghost. It looks like something might be there, but it has no real substance, no power, no existence.
And all of this leaves us with a pretty profound question to chew on. If a law is truly no law at all, if it's a void, a total nullity, then what is the duty of a citizen? And maybe even more important, what is the sworn duty of the local officials we elect, the ones who take an oath to protect our constitutional rights? That is something we're thinking about.